So IGN acquired Humble, the company known for Humble Bundles. You know, they sell you games on the cheap, pay what you want, charity. That was the most concise explanation in the world of Humble, but that's it. In addition, Humble has moved into publishing as well, giving independent games a little bit of an extra leg up. And it's the sort of publishing that I can agree with. An independent company helping other independents get the funding and the resources that they need, rather than some big corporation coming in and saying, right, now that's $60 and let's talk about the season pass, fucko! Now, however, Humble is owned by a corporation called IGN. And I think the biggest news for me is that I finally learned what IGN means. Apparently it's the Imagine Games Network. I had no fucking idea. And hey, according to some of their review scores, the games they've played are imaginary versions. That was just a little joke about people who are angry at review scores. Although it could have come across that I'm quite bitter about their review scores. In truth, I'm not, because I don't really read IGN at all. I used to when I was a kid, and then I stopped. I credit IGN with having banner ads once that advertised Metal Arm's glitch in the system that went on to become one of my favourite games of all time, and a game I love to bring up here and there as this tragic example of... There's an idea for a Jimquisition. I need to go back and talk about Metal Arms again. But anyway, they introduced me to Metal Arms. I read some of their stuff. The first bit of freelance work I ever did, the first real official games media work I ever did was for IGN. I wrote a piece on the arcade game Tattoo Warriors. I think that's what it was, that cancelled game that you can play on MAMES and whatever. I did that for their paid site thing they were doing back in the day, IGN Insider. But that was about it. I kind of forgot about IGN after that point. And IGN has just always sort of been a company that's there. Relatively trouble-free. I know they get in trouble for some stuff. Their reviews get made fun of a lot, and there's some famous stinkers of theirs, but then there's reviews I've done that some would dub famous stinkers. I think every review outlet and every reviewer has some critique they've done that the public en masse would love to see them pilloried for. I mean, speaking from personal experience, I'll blame them in a 10, but that's not the point. IGN isn't a particularly popular company with, well, you. If you're watching a video on this channel, you're probably a member of the more keyed-in community, and members of the more keyed-in community when it comes to games don't tend to have a high opinion of IGN. As I say, I tend to have not a lot of an opinion about IGN. Max Scoville works there. He's a guy who I used to work with, a former colleague of mine, and that's about all I know about the modern IGN, that really is. So when this news came out, obviously a ton of people were like, Jim, what do you think of this? Jim, what do you think of this? And I had a lot of wine in my belly last night when I saw all the news, all of it being talked about, and I was like, well, I don't really know what to say because IGN is sort of a non-entity in my mind. A lot of people are talking about IGN ruining Humble, and I want to try and temper some of that and be a little bit more calm, a little bit more laid back as sort of a grizzled veteran who's sort of out of all this shit now, you know. I don't review video games anymore. The last vestige of traditional media has just kind of sloughed off me as of this past week. So I'm not really hysterical about it, and that goes both ways. You know, I'm not happy about it, but I'm not overly miserable about it. As far as companies go, IGN is relatively benign, I feel. I could be wrong, but I always get the feeling that, again, it's a company that's just sort of there, and generally only comes up when, you know, there's a review that comes out that complains about too much water in a Pokemon game or whatever, and then there's a meme running around about another wacky IGN review. Like I say, they don't get into a lot of shit for real major corruption stinkers, you know? At least none that I can remember off the top of my head. And they're not owned by Fox anymore, so that nasty little finger's out of the pie. Whether or not Humble remains unchanged remains, of course, to be seen, although Humble is excited about it as any company would suggest to the public. Given Humble's success, it doesn't look like a desperation move of a sale or anything. It looks like a, well, what typically happens to a lot of independent companies, a lot of independent game development studios even. They get very successful, but the success starts to outpace their capabilities. and eventually a small company needs to get bigger, and one of the most immediate ways to do that is to be bought by a bigger company, and then you're a smaller company in a bigger company with their resources. It's a move that comes with its own risks, not least the risks that we've seen come true in the game industry, where companies are just turned into video game mills, stripped of their soul, and then kicked out the door as a blooded, emptied husk. I guess you can't be an empty husk and be blooded at the same time. You can have dry bloodstains on you. Either way, I'm saying Electronic Arts will chew you up and spit you the fuck out. And we don't know if IGN will chew up the humble publisher and spit the humble publisher out, but that is a topic for another day. What remains the topic of today is the fact that, as I emphasised a moment ago, Humble is a publisher now. It's a game publishing company, and we have a games media outlet, a game review outlet, purchasing a publisher. Now that's weird. One thing I've said as far back as when I started working at Destructoid is that I never want to see editorial and marketing get into the same bed. I certainly don't want to see editorial and publishing get into the same bed. That's a recipe for trub. Trying to imagine some of the places I've worked over the years, The Escapist, Destructoid. Well, those were the two main places outside of for myself. But I mean, we could apply it to myself. What if I bought, Devolver Digital? That'll annoy Fork Parker. What if I went up to Fork Parker, who is definitely real, and said, "Hey, Forko, come over here. $10, I want Devolver Digital." He won't know it's monopoly money until it's too late. Swindled, bamboozled, company mine, I now have access to Hotline Miami, Mother Russia Bleed Us, and that one with the name that I can never remember, but you're like, you get loads of little followers and they run around and do funny things. It'd be weird. And I certainly couldn't cover any of those games without looking biased as fuck, and in a way in which the word bias actually means something. It's not just a word for intellectual cowards to use because they can't face the idea that someone else disagrees with them on a video game. That would be a real case of bias being applicable to the topic. And that's the situation that IGN kind of finds itself in. Of course, there's a difference between me as one person buying a publisher and a company with lots of employees buying a publisher. But it is a difference of degrees. If you look at an IGN review of, say, A Hat in Time or Scorn, arguably the two biggest games coming out under the Humble label, it's going to be difficult not to be suspicious of an IGN review of that, isn't it? Now, before we continue, I want to temper that again and point out just a sort of little truth that I think is true of the game industry, and I speak as someone who's been doing it for 10 years. In most cases, these accusations of publishers being paid for, being bought off, being corrupted in some way, are total bollocks. As we've seen with GameSpot back in the day, there have been instances where outlets capitulate to publishers after the fact, but in my experience, most reviewers are on the level. The ground level troops who are there doing the work, doing the writing, tend to have very, 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 very little interaction with the executives, the suits and all of that. They tend to be doing their own stuff with their own independent viewpoints, and they get published and there's not a lot of trouble there. You know, conspiracy theories are exciting, but unfortunately life tends to be fairly mundane, at least for us mortals. When it comes to corruption in the game industry, honestly, the worst I've ever seen firsthand was THQ, who would sometimes have an embargo for a game and then say, but hey, if the score's above a certain level, then it can come out a little bit earlier. Which is a bit shitty, but it's not Al Capone level gangsterism. And then on a more insidious level, you get those review events where companies try and lavish sort of luxury upon the reviewers that come visit them at whatever hotel they're in, and give them lovely gifts and great memories to try and marry those good memories, those good times to the game they've been playing at the same time. And that's not so much game reviewers being unethical or what have you, as it is publishers being insidious, vampire-esque psychological manipulators. Just once again, a quick reminder to any reviewer who does want an unpolluted opinion when they're writing their reviews don't bother going to review events, it's difficult to be unpolluted there. Now, having said that, do I think that IGN should start doing reviews for Humble published games in future? After this news, I would still say no. The thing about propriety is, I don't know if I said that right, I don't think I did, it's very early in the morning, fuck it, I'm still a little bit hungover, but the thing about it is, the thing about looking appropriate, the thing about not looking corrupted, is that looks matter just as much as the actual act. You could actually be 100% incorruptible, but it doesn't take a lot for that reputation to go away. You can be completely incorruptible and still have a reputation of someone who is a bought, quote-unquote, reviewer. I think IGN's a perfect example of that. Now, I've never seen any evidence that IGN is in the pocket of Electronic Arts, but it's a popular thing to say. I've seen many people online say, well, we all know that IGN is on the take from EA. We all know that EA buys its reviews from IGN. Like, how do we know this? There's never been any documented proof. There's never been any undocumented proof, it's just become a popular assumption. And it's a hard reputation to wash off, and it can only be borne out that you're not a corrupted sleazebag through continued, repeated evidence that you're on the fucking level. This is why when I did reviews, I would never review anything that I did voice acting for, because of the appearance of it. I might give you an honest opinion, as honest as I feel I can be. I could do a review of Volume or the Charnel House trilogy, but it's going to look dodgy because I was actively involved in the game. Now, IGN as an outlet is actively involved with a lot of games, and if IGN cares about maintaining its reputation, it's gonna want to leave those games alone. Anything else says that IGN doesn't give a shit about its own rep. Doesn't give a shit about its editorial credibility. And that's the bit that interests me. I have a feeling, though I could obviously be wrong, that Humble itself will continue relatively unscathed, unhindered. But how IGN operates from now, that's going to be interesting, because now we're in a world where a review outlet and a publisher have become indistinguishable. It's sort of like the reverse version of Game Informer and GameStop. Not an exact reverse, because GameStop is a retailer, not a publisher, but they have their own outlet. They're still selling you the games, is the point. It's not a 100% analogy, okay? I'm doing my best here. Anyway, that's more or less what I think. I don't know if some of you were expecting outrage. I'm sorry to disappoint you. It's just that, on the whole, this news doesn't faze me very much. I'm just sort of intrigued as to how it plays out. So that's what I think. Those are my thoughts. IGN bought Humble, that's what Jim Sterling thinks. Hey.